Today is Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. President Trump's not happy with NATO. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating. It really helps us out, whatever platform you're listening on, Apple Podcasts. Just drop a rating in there. Leave a comment. That really helps us out. Helps people find this podcast. Share it with a friend, too. It's another easy way to help us out. You can email us. We'd love to hear from you. quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. That's our email address. Joining me today, CBN's Trey Phillips and Billy Hallowell. A lot to get to on the podcast. As always, on the focus story, we got a major prayer movement underway.
Yeah, throughout the rest of this month and into April, Hope California, an organization in California, is calling on all Christians across the country, but definitely in LA, to start praying together. So we'll talk about that movement.
All right, details there in just a moment. On the main thing, an Iranian missile didn't just hit Jerusalem. Debris crashed at one of Christianity's holiest sites. We'll have the details coming up on the main thing. All right, I want to alert you to our sponsor of this podcast, Christian Solidarity International. So glad to have them on board here, sponsoring Quick Start. And we partner with this organization because of the amazing work that they do on the ground to help persecuted Christians in need in some of the most dangerous places around the world. I told you yesterday about the story of Victor, this young man who's from central Nigeria. His life was changed, a brutal attack by Islamist militants last October. He survived it, but he had some pretty severe injuries. Doctors had to amputate one of his legs, and he got in the hospital, had all these hospital bills, and when they got the bill, the final bill, his mom was shocked and said she'd never seen that much money in her entire life, that amount. And so they had no idea how they were going to pay for this. And that's when Christian Solidarity International stepped in. They paid the outstanding bill. And that's just the sort of thing that they do all the time. Because, and how? They're building relationships. They know about these stories because they're on the ground in these places, not just fly by night, drop off some help and leave. They're there building relationships for the long term with pastors, with communities, with pretty much anybody that they can connect with. And so they have the connections on the ground. And so when there is a need, people connect them and they're able to help. And so it's amazing work. And it goes on all over the globe in, like I said, some of the more dangerous areas to be a Christian. So when you hear these stories, if you're feeling like you want to help, you can do that at csi-usa.org/quickstart. Go to csi-usa.org/quickstart. All right, going to go to the news in 90 seconds now. And the conflict with Iran is now stretched into its third week. President Trump claiming U.S. strikes have hit 7,000 targets, crippled roughly 90% of Iran's missile capabilities. But a major problem remains: reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump is openly frustrated that some longtime allies, especially NATO allies, are refusing to help despite decades of the U.S. pouring billions of dollars into protecting them. Meanwhile, confusion surrounds Iran's leadership, with reports suggesting top figures may be dead, missing, or seriously wounded, leaving uncertainty over who's actually in charge. Israel, meanwhile, says it's eliminated key regime figures tied to violent crackdowns on protesters and is now preparing for a possible ground invasion in southern Lebanon, warning civilians to evacuate. And a Christian couple in Sweden has lost their final legal appeal after authorities removed their two daughters back in 2022 and now may permanently place them for adoption. The case began when the couple's 11-year-old made an abuse claim during a dispute over rules like no smartphone or makeup, but she later recanted and prosecutors found no evidence. Those are just some of today's top stories. You can check out more over at cbnnews.com. And guys, this story, we've seen a couple of these over the years, but these officials here cited the family's frequent church attendance and, quote, parenting style as signs of, quote unquote, religious extremism as their justification for keeping these children in state care. And this is, you see this in the Nordic states. I mean, we've seen this a few times, but I mean, this is a sort of thinking that I feel, unfortunately, is being exported around the globe. And while we're not there yet as a country, quite there yet, I feel like we're probably not that far off. And so these are the sorts of things we've got to be aware of and be vigilant against, because that, I mean, to me, from my perspective, that is a parent's absolute worst nightmare.
Yeah, it's not only is it their worst nightmare, it's an erosion of absolute freedom and authority over your children and your family. And the fact that we're living in a world where these things are possible, of course you want children protected, but you need to make sure that you're protecting parental rights and making sure. And this is why when you throw people into a big system, once you're in that system, you better hope that it's a system that is well-oiled and working well with competent people. When it's not, you're dealing with a disaster.
Well, it's hard to see how something like this is not an attack on the nuclear family, right? Constantly the left is like, well, it's a slippery slope. Nobody's coming after your family. It's like, well, it kind of looks like they're coming after the nuclear family. So, and that's obviously by design, because that's God's design, is for the nuclear family, a husband and a wife raising their children. And they have, as you said, Billy, autonomy over how they raise their children. Obviously, in instances of legitimate abuse, genuine abuse, there's no well-meaning Christian who studies scripture who would say that's okay. So we're dismissing those. Obviously, those need to be addressed. But situations where it's clearly this is just a desire to implement and to shove down the throats of these parents an agenda and an ideology that the government prefers, the secular world prefers over Christianity. I think that is something that, even if you're not a Christian, that should alarm you, because it's not, the next person comes into power. What if they're not secular? What if they don't agree with what you agree with? And now the shoe's on the other foot and you're the one facing condemnation. So, yeah, I think this is something that everybody should be outraged by.
Absolutely. You need to be praying for that family, that justice prevails, hopefully, and they actually are able to get their kids back. All right, we're going to go to the focus story now. And as Trey mentioned there at the top, we've got a prayer movement that's rising up. So, Trey, what is 1 Million Rise, the movement there, and what's the goal?
So, a major prayer initiative has been organized in Los Angeles calling for 1 million Christians. That's why it's called 1 Million Rise. They're calling on 1 million Christians, at least, to unite in prayer, fasting, and evangelism over the next 40-day period, starting this month and going into the month of April and the lead up to Easter Sunday. The goal is to spark a citywide spiritual awakening. Obviously, they want people around the country to participate, but the goal is focused on LA, obviously the center of Hollywood, hoping for, as I said, a spiritual awakening there in Los Angeles, encouraging people to share their faith and seek transformation in their homes and amongst their families, and more broadly in the communities where a whole lot of celebrities, athletes, actors, singers, all that, a whole lot of very famous people live. And many of them have not been exposed to the gospel, or if they have, they've been hostile toward it.
And so how is this whole thing going to happen?
So participants across the city are expected to engage in just coordinated spiritual events. Like I said, some will center on praying, some will center on fasting, others will center on tangibly, how can we reach out locally and help those in our community? LA has a huge homelessness issue, so that's certainly a way that local churches might participate. So this is kind of a coordinated effort that will bring local Christian communities and certainly local church congregations together, focused on this one goal of spiritual awakening in Los Angeles. And rather than being tied to one single organization, there's no one single organization that's spearheading it, no one organization or church that's leading it. The movement is talking about and wanting to foster that collective participation across neighborhoods, hopefully, so that once this has been accomplished, those connections won't go away. There'll be connections that remain in place that can continue to serve the community there in Los Angeles and hopefully disciple new believers.
And so what is motivating this for it to be going on at this particular time right now?
Obviously, we're in our 250th anniversary as a country. We'll be celebrating that in July, but also in 2028, LA is going to be hosting the Olympics. So I know that people are starting to pour more money and time already into Los Angeles, getting ready for that. And of course, LA is already a very affluent and well-known area. So certainly it's something that has always been an issue and has always been something that Christians want to focus on. But those are a couple of the reasons why the focus now on Los Angeles. And something that I was looking at too that I find interesting is a Pew Research survey from last year found that 44% of Americans pray at least once a day, 67% say that they pray occasionally, and roughly 1/3 say they seldom or never pray. And again, in a city like Los Angeles, that's generally kind of post-Christian. I imagine the 1/3 across the country who don't pray, that number is probably much higher in a place like Los Angeles. So there certainly is a spiritual need because there's been spiritual lack in a city like Los Angeles.
Yeah. And listen, anywhere this would be taking place, I mean, obviously Los Angeles needs it just about as much as anybody, but it's great to see, again, people rising up and seeing the power of prayer. Obviously, as Christians, we believe in the power of prayer. And you got to be happy anytime you see a movement like this gaining steam, because the more prayer, the better.
My hope is we see this spread throughout every city. I mean, we need it everywhere. LA, New York. You know, the more that people lean in, we're not gonna halt the chaos and the confusion that we see happening throughout culture, but we can combat it by giving people the only hope that will heal them. And so this is cool to see. I hope we see other cities, follow suit after they see how this all shakes out.
Yeah, I think it's great to see not just let's pray for a community, but let's find ways that we can tangibly help them. Because when you meet people's physical needs, immediate needs, that creates trust in a relationship and in a community that you can then have those spiritual conversations, and people are more inclined to listen to you and to entertain you and to consider what you're presenting to them when there's been an established trust. Like, well, you met this physical need that I had. So yeah, I think it's encouraging, Billy, like you said, to see something like this happening. Hopefully it spreads. If you want to check out more about what's going on in LA with this movement, on cbnnews.com, we have Charlene Aaron actually has a full-length report and interview on this. So certainly an interesting story.
All right. Appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today, Trey. And we're going to go to the main thing now. And a piece of an Iranian ballistic missile slammed into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the traditional site of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. CBN's Raj Nair's joined by Jerusalem-based journalist Nicole Yanachan with the breaking details from the Holy Land. That's today's main thing.
Nicole, what can you tell us?
Raj, this is unbelievable because in some ways this is just an unprecedented attack that has happened. Not that anybody thinks that, at the moment that any of these holy sites were targeted, but the fact that a missile has now rained across its fragments over the old city, touching every single quarter, including these prominent holy sites. This is probably unprecedented in any of the recent conflicts that we've had.
Okay, Nicole, what have been some of the reactions to folks in Jerusalem when, shrapnel's raining down from the sky?
Yeah, this is, like I said, this is something that hasn't happened frequently in Jerusalem. In fact, the sad joke in Jerusalem is that when there's wars, Jerusalem is usually the safest place to be because you assume that, nobody wants to hit the holy sites and touch off a religious war. And that was the case even in June during the war with Iran, the 12-day war. Jerusalem had fewer missiles, I think, at least anecdotally, than other cities. But this time, Jerusalem's has had more sirens and more missiles and actually more impacts than a lot of people have experienced in previous wars. So now it's touching closer to home for a lot of people, and especially in the old city. So I was just there. We went there. I went straight after we heard about these attacks. One of them, by the way, was outside the window of my mother-in-law's house. She lives right on the border between the Armenian quarter and the Jewish quarter, and a fragment landed in the parking lot right outside her window. So this is really touching close to home. And I asked her about it, and she said she's never had anything in all of her years of living in Jerusalem. There's never been something that's come so close to her. So it's not just the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. According to the police report, also on the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa Mosque area, the Dome of the Rock area, that whole plaza, there were fragments there as well. So this was like a multi-religion, multi-quarter impact. And it really is something that has shaken the residents of the old city. They are not used to it coming this close. Now, something else needs to be said about the old city. In most of the buildings, there are no bomb shelters. If you come to like the west side of Jerusalem and in many places across Israel, you have bomb shelters in most buildings, or at least some that are close by. But in the old city, most of the residents are living without that. And the city has been shut down for the most part, the old city, because of that. But I just talked to a man who brought his kids in the house and his wife. They were in their house and they heard a crash on their roof in one of the quarters. I don't know if I'm allowed to name which one. And they went out and there was a fragment on their roof. And again, no shelter, just in their house. And he said, at least now, though, I don't have to convince the kids that they should be inside when there's a siren.
And not to be hyperbolic, but this seems a little apocalyptic in the sense that this sounds like a lot of those, end time movies you watch growing up, where it's like missiles and fragments of missiles raining down over the skies over the old city of Jerusalem. As you mentioned, the Temple Mount, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I mean, this is, even if, as you mentioned, it wasn't the target, it wasn't the intention. This is massive news. But I think the news that we need to focus on, if this news is freaking you out, I think this news, written by a fellow named Luke a couple thousand years ago. It says this: why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. Traditionally, right? The Church of Holy Sepulchre, this is where that happens. And here are the three words that are the good news, my friend. He has risen. So as fragments of missiles are raining down over the old city of Jerusalem, literally landing right next to the Church of Holy Sepulchre on the Temple Mount, you have people, I'm sure, afraid to say it lightly, but I think our message in this moment, what we should be focusing on, and I don't know all that God's up to, but man, what a moment for us as believers in Yeshua to be praying literally for the peace of Jerusalem, not just the outskirts, not just the suburbs, but for the holy old city. This is I'm trying to contextualize it in real time, Nicole. This is wild stuff. You, my friend, without declaring where you live specifically, you stay safe. I know my friend watching here will be praying for you, your family, your mother-in-law, the city of Jerusalem. Let's all join together and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We are living in prophetic times. I don't know how else to call it, but Nicole, as always, thank you so much for coming on, and God bless.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much.
All right, appreciate that there, Raj. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
We got 1 Corinthians 16:14, do everything in love. Just a simple verse and a powerful reminder. It's easy to get frustrated and annoyed in life, but how we react matters, and everything we do we're called to do it in love. It can be tough sometimes.
Well, I think that's a good verse for the story we had for the focus too, because it tells us to pursue everything in love, not out of selfish ambition, which is so often the case as human beings.
Absolutely. And that's a good thought to leave it on in this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Make sure you're making that a daily stop and throughout your day as well. And if you want to help out Christians who are being persecuted around the globe, go to csi-usa.org/quickstart. God bless. We'll see you back here tomorrow.